Millionaire abandons girlfriend, years later sees her with quadruplets and wants to take her kids away. But what she does leaves him shocked. Before we dive into the story, comment below. Where are you watching from? Enjoy the story, everyone. Claire was in the bridal suite, adjusting her veil while her best friend, Emily, tried to comfort her. The ceremony should have already started. "He loves you, Claire. He's just late because he wants everything to be perfect," Emily said, though even she didn't seem entirely convinced. But Claire knew. Something was wrong. Richard wasn't the type to be late. She glanced at the clock again, feeling a tightness in her chest. Every second felt like an eternity. Finally, the priest entered the room. His solemn expression confirmed Claire's worst fears. "I'm sorry, Miss Claire. We've received word that Richard will not be coming." The words hit Claire like a blow. She felt her legs weaken but held onto the table. Tears began streaming down her face, smudging her makeup. "This can't be. It must be a mistake," she said, her voice trembling. Without waiting for an answer, Claire ran out of the church. Curious stares from the guests followed her as she rushed down the aisle. The humiliation was overwhelming, but the pain was even greater. When she reached the parking lot, she stopped, desperately searching for Richard. But he wasn't there. She looked up at the sky, trying to control her tears, but all she could feel was humiliation and pain. Questions flooded her mind like a storm. Why? What did she do wrong? And then she remembered a conversation they had 2 weeks earlier. She vividly recalled the distant expression on his face as he held her hand. "Are you sure you want this?" he asked suddenly, breaking the silence. "Of course I do," Claire replied, confused. "We love each other, don't we?" Richard hesitated but eventually smiled. It was a fragile smile, one Claire hadn't recognized as a warning at the time. Back in the present, Claire sat on the curb, her white dress pooling around her. Tears silently rolled down her face. The humiliation and pain were unbearable. She wanted to disappear. Across the street, hidden in a car, Richard watched her. He held his phone in his hands, replaying his mother's words in his mind. "This marriage isn't what you need, Richard. Think about your future. This marriage would never work out." He lowered his gaze, struggling with guilt. He knew what he had done was unforgivable, but he didn't have the courage to face Claire or the expectations everyone had placed on him. Claire wiped her tears, took a deep breath, and made a decision. She would leave. She wouldn't let anyone see her as a victim. Meanwhile, Richard remained in the car, watching her from afar, knowing that moment was just the beginning of something he could never undo. The day after the disastrous wedding, Claire left the city. There were no goodbyes, no explanations, no confrontations. She simply got on a bus, headed anywhere far away from everything and everyone. With every mile traveled, memories of the previous day crushed her even more. But she knew she had to move forward. Staying wasn't an option. The first few months were tough. Claire rented a small room in an unfamiliar town, started working at a cafe, and tried, day by day, to rebuild her life. But the pain lingered, along with the sense of failure. Everything seemed to crumble until one day, something unexpected changed her life forever. 2 months later, Claire had been feeling strange for weeks. Morning sickness, extreme fatigue, and a constant sense that something was different. She blamed it on stress and the weight of everything she'd been through, until, in a moment of doubt, she bought a pharmacy test. That night, in the small bathroom of her apartment, Claire stared at the confirmation. The test was positive. Her heart raced. She felt a mix of fear and joy. Part of her panicked at the thought of raising a child alone, without support, without family nearby. But at the same time, an unexpected sense of purpose took over. This baby was her second chance, a reason to keep going. The days that followed were all about adjustment. Claire scheduled a medical appointment, and reality started to set in. But nothing prepared her for the moment when the doctor, with a kind smile, looked at the ultrasound monitor and said, "Congratulations, Claire. It's 4. She blinked, confused. 4? Quadruplets, the doctor replied calmly. Claire felt the world spin. It was far more than she expected, far more than she thought she could handle. "Will I be able to do this?" she asked, not realizing she'd spoken aloud. The doctor simply smiled. "You'll find that mothers always find a way." With the news of her pregnancy, Claire knew she needed to change everything. Her small room was no longer enough. She saved every penny she earned at the cafe and managed to rent a modest little house on the outskirts of town. It was small, but enough for her and her future children. Meanwhile, people around her began to notice her strength. Even pregnant with 4 babies, Claire worked as much as she could. She balanced her time between medical appointments, her job, and preparing the house. Each small achievement was another step forward in her new journey. But there were hard days, nights when she cried alone, feeling the weight of it all. There were doubts, fears, and that recurring question. If Richard knew, would he care? She pushed the thought away every time it surfaced, focusing only on what needed to be done. The news of the quadruplets, as shocking as it was, gave Claire newfound strength. She knew that if she had survived what she'd been through, she could face anything. Her children would be her priority, and no one, not even Richard, could change that. The months passed faster than Claire expected. Between hospital visits and organizing the house, she barely had time to process everything. Then the day arrived. The delivery was complicated, but all 4 babies were born healthy. As Claire held each one in her arms, she felt something she had never experienced before: pure love. That moment erased any lingering doubts. From then on, she knew she would do whatever it took for them. 5 years passed, and Claire had adapted to life as a single mother of quadruplets. The once quiet house was now filled with laughter, chaos, and toys scattered everywhere. Each of the boys had a unique personality. Lucas was the curious one, always asking questions. Noah was shy but incredibly affectionate. Liam was the jokester, always making everyone laugh. And Oliver was the little leader, always organizing his brothers in their mischief. The routine was exhausting, but Claire felt fulfilled. She worked tirelessly to provide for her family, juggling multiple jobs. No matter how hard it got, she never complained. Each smile from her boys was a reminder of why she kept going. But life is never predictable. One ordinary afternoon, as she took the boys to the park to play, Claire saw someone she never expected to see. She froze in place, her heart racing. Richard was there. He was sitting on a bench, talking to someone, but his expression changed when his eyes met Claire's. He glanced at the 4 boys playing nearby, and the resemblance left no room for doubt. The reunion Claire had feared had just happened. Claire froze in place, her eyes fixed on Richard, while her children played innocently in the playground. He was only a few meters away, but to her it felt like an eternity. Time seemed to have stopped. Richard was looking directly at her, but quickly shifted his gaze to the boys running across the grass, laughing and racing to the slide. Their resemblance to him was undeniable. Claire felt her heart race. She needed to leave before Richard could approach her. Grabbing her bag and trying to hide her nervousness, she called out to the boys. "Lucas, Noah, Liam, Oliver, let's go. It's time to head home," she said, her voice slightly louder than usual. The boys protested, of course, asking for more time to play, but Claire's firm tone was enough to convince them. They began gathering their toys scattered around the park as Claire urged them to hurry. But before she could take another step, she heard a firm voice behind her. "Claire?" She froze. That sound, familiar and heavy with uncertainty, made her stomach churn. Slowly she turned around, meeting Richard's intense gaze. He looked visibly confused, but there was something else in his expression, a mix of surprise and disbelief. "Richard," she murmured, trying to sound indifferent but failing miserably. "Are they your kids?" He pointed to the boys, who were still preoccupied with their toys. Claire hesitated, her face growing warm. She knew she couldn't avoid this conversation forever. "Yes, they're my children," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Richard took a step closer, his eyes shifting between her and the children. He seemed to process the information slowly. "How old are they?" he asked, though the answer was already obvious. Claire bit her lip, trying to stay calm. 5. Richard's expression changed. It was as if he had been punched in the stomach. He opened his mouth to say something but closed it again, still trying to absorb the situation. "Are they mine?" The question came out as a whisper. Claire felt the ground disappear beneath her. She had mentally prepared for this moment for years, but now that it was here, she didn't know what to say. She decided to be straightforward. "Yes, Richard, they're yours." The silence that followed was almost unbearable. Richard ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture Claire remembered well. He looked back at the boys, who were now watching her with curiosity, sensing that something was happening. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his tone now heavier, a mix of anger and hurt. "You left me, Richard," Claire said, crossing her arms in an attempt to shield herself. "You walked away without an explanation. I was alone, humiliated, and pregnant. What did you expect me to do?" Richard blinked a few times, trying to find the words to respond, but stayed silent. He knew she was right. He had no excuse. "I need to meet them," he said, breaking the silence. Claire instinctively stepped back. "It's not that simple, Richard. They don't know who you are." "And why not? I'm their father." Those words echoed in Claire's mind, bringing a surge of anger and pain. She stepped forward, looking him directly in the eye. "Father? You have no idea what it means to be a father, Richard. You weren't there when I spent sleepless nights wondering how to pay the bills. You weren't there when I had to care for 4 babies at the same time, all on my own. Father? Don't make me laugh." Richard swallowed hard but stood his ground. He knew Claire was right, but he couldn't let the conversation end there. "I know I made a mistake, but that doesn't change the fact that they're my children too. I have the right to know them, Claire." "Right?" Claire let out a bitter laugh. "You gave up that right the day you left me at the altar." While the two argued, Lucas, the most curious of the quadruplets, approached and tugged on his mother's dress. "Mommy, who is this man?" he asked, his big brown eyes sparkling with curiosity. Claire looked down at her son, her heart sinking. Before she could answer, Richard knelt in front of the boy, his face softening for the first time since he approached. "Hi there, champ. My name is Richard," he said, offering a hesitant smile. Lucas tilted his head, studying the stranger. "Do you know my mommy?" Richard chuckled lightly, glancing at Claire before replying. "Yes, I do." Claire took a deep breath and gently nudged Lucas away. "Go play with your brother, sweetheart. Mommy will be there soon." Lucas hesitated but eventually obeyed. Claire turned back to Richard, her stern expression returning. "You can't just show up and expect everything to be resolved. That's not how this works." Richard shook his head. "I'm not asking to fix everything right now, but I'm not going away, Claire. Not this time." Claire felt a wave of panic. She knew Richard wasn't the kind of man who gave up easily. After that day, Claire returned home with the boys, her heart heavy. As she tucked them into bed, she couldn't stop thinking about what would come next. As much as she wanted to protect her children, she knew it would be impossible to keep Richard away now that he knew the truth. Across town, Richard sat in his luxurious apartment, staring out the window. He thought about the boys, about Claire, and about how things could have been different if he had made another choice years ago. For the first time in a long time, he felt the need to make things right. Claire barely had time to recover from the unexpected reunion with Richard when, just a few days later, there was a knock at her door. She opened it, and there he was again. This time, he looked even more determined, his expression a mix of regret and resolve. "Claire, we need to talk," he said bluntly. "We have nothing to talk about, Richard," she replied, crossing her arms. "I'm not leaving until we do." The tension between them was palpable, and Claire knew she couldn't avoid the conversation forever. Before she could close the door, Lucas appeared in the hallway, watching curiously. "Mommy, it's the man from the park." Claire tried to smile at her son, but Richard seized the moment. "Hi there, champ," he said, kneeling to Lucas's height. "My name is Richard." Lucas tilted his head, intrigued, but Claire quickly intervened. "Lucas, go back to your room, sweetheart. Mommy will be there soon," she said firmly. Once Lucas left, she turned to Richard, her irritation clear. "You can't just show up here and talk to them, Richard." "Claire, they're my children. I have the right to know them," he retorted, his voice steady. "Right?" She let out a bitter laugh. "You gave up that right when you left me at the altar. I raised these boys on my own. You don't know what it's like to lose sleep, to sacrifice everything for them. And now you think you can just show up as if nothing happened?" Richard took a deep breath, clearly trying to keep his composure. He knew Claire was right in many ways, but he also knew he couldn't walk away. "I know I made a mistake. I'm not trying to justify what I did, but it doesn't change the fact that they're my children too." Claire's heart tightened. She wanted to protect them from everything, But she also knew Richard wasn't the kind of man who would back down easily. "What do you want, Richard?" she asked, exhausted. "I want to know them, to spend time with them. Is that too much to ask?" He looked at her with genuine intent. "It is too much. They don't even know who you are, and I'm not going to let you disrupt their lives," she replied firmly. Richard remained silent for a moment, then said what Claire feared most. "If you don't give me this chance, I'll take it to court." The words hit Claire like a blow. The silence that followed Richard's departure from Claire's small house was almost deafening. He had made it clear that if she didn't allow him to be part of the boys' lives, he would use every legal resource available to him. Claire tried to stay calm, but she knew what was coming would be a difficult battle. Days later, the summons arrived. Richard had filed a lawsuit for joint custody. Claire felt the ground disappear beneath her. Her first reaction was outrage. He had been absent for 5 years, and now he wanted parental rights? It made no sense to her. Desperate, Claire sought help. The first person she turned to was Amelia, her longtime friend and an experienced attorney. Sitting in Claire's small kitchen, they discussed her options. "Claire, we need to be realistic. He has money, resources, and a powerful legal team. But you have something he doesn't, a history of dedication. You've been there for the boys every single day," Amelia said, reviewing the summons documents. "And what if that's not enough?" Claire asked, clutching a coffee cup with trembling hands. "It will be. We'll fight with everything we've got. The first step is building your defense. We'll gather evidence, testimonies, whatever it takes to show that you're the best person to care for them." Claire nodded, but the weight of the looming battle still pressed heavily on her. She knew she had to protect her children at all costs. When the initial hearing arrived, Claire entered the courtroom with Amelia by her side. On the other side, Richard stood with his lawyer, and to her surprise, Stella, his fiancée. A wave of anger surged through Claire as she saw her. Stella looked perfectly at ease, as though this were just another social event. Richard's lawyer opened the arguments. He emphasized that Richard had the resources to provide the boys with a better life, quality education, financial stability, and a secure environment. As he spoke, Claire felt her chest tighten. The words were polished and well-rehearsed, but she knew the reality was far from what they claimed. When it was Amelia's turn, she spoke confidently. "Your Honor, my client has dedicated her life to her children. She raised them on her own, facing hardships that most would struggle to endure. Mr. Richard may have financial means, but Miss Claire has something far more valuable, an emotional bond built through years of love, sacrifice, and unwavering dedication." The judge listened carefully to both sides and, after the hearing, decided that further investigation was needed before reaching a decision. He ordered a social worker to visit both Claire's and Richard's homes to evaluate the living conditions. After the hearing, Richard approached Claire in the hallway. He looked tired but determined. "I don't want to take the boys away from you, Claire. I just want to be part of their lives," he said calmly. "You say that now, but taking this to court was your idea." "That's not the action of someone who wants to resolve things peacefully," she replied, her anger barely concealed. Stella appeared behind him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We're just trying to make sure the boys get what they deserve," Stella said with a cold smile. Claire's blood boiled. "What they deserve is stability and love. Things I've always given them. I don't need advice from you, Stella." Without waiting for a response, Claire turned and walked away, doing her best to ignore the sinking feeling that this battle was far from over. In the days that followed, the tension grew. Stella's presence became more intrusive. At first, she started showing up at the boys' school events, always impeccably dressed, smiling at other parents, and trying to befriend the teachers. Then rumors began circulating that Claire was a negligent mother, clearly a narrative spread by Stella. Let's have a little fun with those who only read the comments. Type pizza in the comments. Only those who get this far will understand. Now let's continue the story. The situation worsened when the rumors reached the media. Articles began to appear, portraying Richard as a devoted father trying to make up for lost time, and Claire as an uncooperative mother refusing to share parenting responsibilities. Claire felt the sting of public judgment, but refused to give up. Amelia, however, noticed that Stella's interference went beyond simple gossip. During a conversation with Claire, she shared her suspicions. Stella isn't just trying to help him. She has something to gain from this. Richard might not see it, but she's manipulating the situation to ensure you lose the boys, Amelia said. Do you think she wants more than that? Claire asked, surprised. I'm certain, if she can push you out of the picture, she'll have Richard completely under her control. This is more about power than love, Amelia affirmed. Claire knew Amelia was right. Stella was dangerous, and underestimating her would be a mistake. The social worker's visit was another tense moment. Claire prepared her home meticulously, ensuring everything showed how happy and well cared for her children were. During the interview, the boys spoke openly about their routines, the games they played, and the love they received from their mother. The social worker seemed impressed with Claire's dedication, but Claire knew he would also visit Richard. At Richard's home, the scene was very different. Stella had arranged everything to appear perfect. The children's room was spotless, filled with expensive toys the boys had never seen before. During the interview, Richard tried to appear relaxed, but Stella's controlling demeanor and rehearsed answers caught the social worker's attention. Her behavior raised suspicion. When the report arrived, no final decision had been made, but Claire felt a small victory in realizing the truth about Stella was beginning to surface. Even so, the pressure didn't let up. Richard continued to insist he wanted to be part of the boys' lives, while Stella did everything she could to undermine Claire. The battle was far from over, and Claire knew she would need all her strength to protect her children. The day of the trial had arrived, and Claire hadn't slept the night before. She worried about the boys, their future, and what lay ahead. When she arrived at the courthouse with Amelia by her side, she took a deep breath as she noticed the packed room. Dozens of eyes turned toward her, but Claire stood firm. She couldn't show weakness now. On the other side of the room, Richard sat beside Stella and his lawyer. He appeared calm, but Claire knew he was nervous too. Stella, however, exuded confidence. Her posture, her gaze, everything about her seemed to declare that she had already won the battle. The judge began the hearing by reviewing the report submitted by the social worker. Claire listened intently as Amelia presented her defense, highlighting the years of dedication Claire had given as a single mother. It was a story of sacrifice and unconditional love, something Claire knew to be her deepest truth. But when Richard's lawyer began speaking, the tone shifted entirely. He argued that Richard had the means and resources to provide the boys with a better life, painting a picture of stability, comfort, and opportunity, things he claimed Claire couldn't offer at the same level. As she listened, Claire felt a lump form in her throat. She knew Richard's argument was strong, but she also knew the emotional bond she shared with her children was something money could never buy. When it was Richard's turn to be questioned, Amelia stood, adjusting her blazer. She started with direct questions. "Mr. Richard, could you tell us why you chose to walk away from Claire 5 years ago?" Richard hesitated. The silence in the room became almost tangible before he finally answered. My mother convinced me it wasn't the right time. She said the marriage would be a mistake, that I needed to focus on my career." A murmur spread through the spectators in the courtroom. Claire felt her face flush with anger. Richard's words confirmed what she had feared. He hadn't made the decision alone. Amelia didn't waste time pressing further. "So you left Claire at the altar because your mother influenced you? Is that correct?" Richard took a deep breath, visibly uncomfortable. "Yes, but the final decision was mine. I listened to what she said." Amelia held his gaze firmly before continuing. "And Stella? Did she have any involvement in that decision?" Richard blinked, caught off guard by the question. He glanced at Stella, who maintained a neutral expression, though there was a flicker of unease in her eyes. He shook his head. No, Stella had nothing to do with it. Amelia stepped back, but Claire felt there was more to uncover. The mention of Stella had left a tension in the air, something no one seemed ready to address at that moment. When Claire took the witness stand, the atmosphere shifted again. She spoke about the sacrifices she had made, how she had raised the boys alone without support, and the love she had for them. "I've done everything I could to give my children a happy and safe life. I may not have much, but I've always given them my all. These boys are the reason I keep going every single day." Claire's words brought tears to the eyes of several people in the courtroom. Even Richard seemed shaken, but Stella appeared restless, whispering something to Richard's lawyer. Sensing the growing tension, the judge called for a recess. When the session resumed, Amelia requested to call a new witness. The courtroom doors opened, revealing a figure Claire hadn't seen in years: Morgan, the former housekeeper for Richard's family. She walked in slowly, supported by a cane, but with a determined look in her eyes. Richard tensed visibly, while Stella averted her gaze. Morgan took the stand and began to speak. She recounted her 20 years of service with Richard's family and described what she had witnessed in the days leading up to the wedding. Her voice was calm, but her words carried immense weight. Richard's mother manipulated the entire situation. She convinced him that Claire wasn't good enough for their family. She used his fears against him, saying the marriage would ruin his career and that Claire didn't have the social standing they expected. The revelations caused a stir in the room. Claire felt her heart tighten as she listened. Though she had always suspected as much, hearing the confirmation hurt more than she had expected. Morgan continued, detailing the conversations she overheard and how Richard's mother controlled every aspect of his life. But then, Morgan paused before revealing something even more shocking. Stella was involved too. She was close to Richard's mother and supported the idea that he should stay away from Claire. She encouraged his decision. The silence in the room was immediately broken by murmurs. Richard turned to Stella, stunned. He seemed to struggle to process what he had just heard. "That's not true," Stella exclaimed, standing abruptly. The judge banged his gavel, calling for order. Richard turned to Stella, his eyes filled with doubt. "You knew about all this?" he asked, his voice low but heavy with disbelief. Stella tried to deny it, but the nervousness in her expression betrayed her. The witness was dismissed, but the impact of her words lingered. The session was adjourned so the judge could review the new information. Claire left the courtroom with Morgan by her side, trying to process everything that had happened. The weight of years of pain seemed to finally be acknowledged, but she knew the fight wasn't over yet. Across the hall, Richard stood frozen. He looked lost, as if the ground had crumbled beneath him. Stella tried to pull him away, but he brushed her off, clearly shaken. As Claire walked away, she heard Stella arguing with Richard. The words were muffled, but she could tell things were falling apart between them. Despite the relief of seeing the truth begin to surface, Claire knew the battle was far from won. After the upheaval in court, things began to shift. Richard was different, and Claire couldn't ignore it. He started showing up regularly for supervised visits, always bringing something special for the boys. It wasn't always expensive toys, but thoughtful items that showed genuine effort. A book Lucas loved, a soccer ball for Liam, colored pencils for Noah, and a puzzle that fascinated Oliver. At first, the boys were cautious, but Richard's patience began to pave the way for a genuine connection. He listened to them, joined in their games, and even sat on the floor to help build puzzles or draw pictures. Claire watched from a distance, always alert, but she couldn't deny the boys' laughter was genuine and unguarded. One afternoon, Richard brought a kite to teach the boys how to fly it. Claire couldn't help but watch more closely. The wind was perfect, and the boys ran across the park, trying to keep the kite in the air as Richard cheered them on. Liam, always the most competitive, managed to keep it flying the longest and shouted with joy. Richard gave him an enthusiastic hug, and Claire saw something she never thought she'd witness. Richard genuinely looked happy. As the weeks went by, Claire saw that Richard's efforts weren't fleeting. He began taking an interest in the boys' daily lives, asking about their classes, friends, and even their small struggles. He took Noah to an art class, encouraged Oliver as he mastered tricky new words, and celebrated Lucas's progress in a math game. These moments weren't grand, but they showed that Richard was genuinely present. Despite this, Claire remained cautious. She knew that no matter how committed Richard seemed, there was a history of disappointments that couldn't be ignored. Even so, it was impossible not to notice the transformation. One evening, while tidying up the kitchen after dinner, Richard approached and began helping her in silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper. "Thank you for letting me be part of their lives, Claire. I know it's more than I deserve." Claire paused for a moment, holding a plate in her hand. She wanted to say something sarcastic, something to remind him there was still a lot to make up for. But when she looked at him, she saw sincerity. He wasn't the confident, arrogant Richard she once knew. He was a man trying to do the right thing, even if it was too late. "They're happy. That's what matters," she replied, turning back to the sink. But deep down, she knew she was happy too, seeing her children smile. As time passed, Richard's presence became natural for the boys. Lucas was the first to call him Daddy spontaneously during a game. Richard froze, clearly moved, but he didn't make a big deal of it. He simply smiled and continued playing ball with them. Soon, the others followed Lucas's lead, and Claire realized something genuine was happening. Even with this growing bond, Claire didn't lose her independence. She continued to care for the boys on her own, ensuring her role as their mother was respected. To her surprise, Richard seemed to understand this and never overstepped the boundaries she set. He helped, but never interfered. One particularly peaceful evening, Richard brought a photo album. He handed it to Claire, explaining that it contained moments from his childhood that he wanted to share with the boys. Claire flipped through the album as Richard explained each photo, and the boys listened intently. It was a simple moment, but it showed Claire that Richard was trying, not just with the boys, but also with her. While all this unfolded, Stella refused to accept the new dynamic. After the revelations in court, she had lost much of her influence over Richard, and it left her furious. It wasn't just the rejection that stung, it was the public humiliation. She couldn't stand seeing Richard build a new relationship with Claire and the boys while she was pushed aside. Stella began plotting her next move. For weeks, she gathered information, pulling strings behind the scenes to create a plan that would shatter the fragile peace forming between them. In her mind, Claire was to blame for everything, and the boys were obstacles she needed to eliminate to win Richard back. As Claire and Richard started building something close to friendship, and the boys grew accustomed to their father's presence, Stella made her move. One day, Claire received a call from an unknown number. On the other end, a cold voice said, "You think this peace will last? Just wait and see what's coming." Claire knew exactly whose voice it was. Her heart raced, but she refused to show fear. She hung up without responding and returned to the living room, where the boys were playing with Richard. She knew Stella wouldn't give up easily, but this time, Claire was ready to fight. Meanwhile, Stella continued scheming, determined to disrupt the relationship between Richard, Claire, and the boys. To her, the court's decision was only temporary, and she was prepared to do whatever it took to tear them apart. The days of shared time between Richard and the boys began to shape a new routine. Claire, ever vigilant, allowed him to spend time with the children under her supervision. Richard never complained about the conditions she imposed. He seemed genuinely determined to prove he could be a steady presence in their lives. At first, Claire kept an emotional barrier firmly in place. She watched Richard interact with the boys, always on the lookout for signs that he might leave again. But over the weeks, it became increasingly clear that Richard was making a genuine effort to be different. He didn't just play with the boys, he paid attention to the little things. He helped Lucas build a robot for a school project, taught Liam how to kick a ball with precision, encouraged Oliver to overcome his fear of heights at the playground, and praised Noah's drawings, carefully storing them in a folder he always carried with him. One afternoon, while the children played in the backyard, Richard offered to help Claire with dinner. She hesitated at first, but eventually gave in. He seemed clumsy chopping vegetables, but he didn't give up. "I never pictured you in the kitchen," Claire said, not hiding her tone of irony. Richard laughed, continuing to chop the carrot inefficiently. "I know. Honestly, I've never had to do this before, but I think it's time I learn, don't you?" Claire watched him for a moment before returning to stir the pot. There was something different about him, something she couldn't ignore. As much as she wanted to keep her guard up, she couldn't deny that his simple gestures and patience with the boys were starting to change her perspective. That same evening, Richard surprised everyone by pulling out a guitar he had brought along. He sat on the couch with the boys gathered around him and began to play. The notes were simple but precise. He sang a children's song that made the boys laugh, especially when he messed up the lyrics halfway through. Standing in the kitchen doorway, Claire caught herself smiling, despite herself. It had been a long time since she had seen her children so relaxed and happy. Over the weeks, the boys began to bond with Richard in ways Claire hadn't anticipated. Liam, always the most reserved, started asking when his father would return as soon as he left. Noah, the artistic one, loved showing his drawings to Richard, while Lucas asked him to play video games almost daily. Oliver, still shy, followed Richard closely, mimicking his gestures as if he wanted to be just like him. The change was undeniable, but Claire continued to wrestle with her own emotions. Part of her was happy to see the boys creating memories with their father, but another part of her still feared it could all fall apart. Richard seemed to have changed, but was this transformation permanent? Could she ever forgive him and let him get closer? One morning, while they were at the park, Richard sat beside Claire on a bench. The boys were running around, tossing a frisbee to each other. He sighed and looked at her with a serious expression. "Thank you for letting me be here, Claire. I know it wasn't easy to give me another chance." She kept her eyes on the boys but responded honestly. "It's not about trust, Richard. It's about them. They need stability, and I can't risk you disappearing again." Richard nodded, understanding. "I get it, but I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." As much as she wanted to doubt him, Claire realized that so far he had kept every promise he made since returning. Maybe, just maybe, he was truly committed to being a present father. One evening, while putting the boys to bed, Richard sat on the floor of their room, holding an old photo album he had brought. The children were curious to learn more about their father's childhood, and he seemed eager to share. "When I was a kid, I loved building things," he began, flipping through the album. "One time, my dad gave me a toy toolbox, and I spent weeks trying to build a little house in the backyard. Of course, it collapsed after the first rain, but it was the most fun I'd ever had." The boys laughed, and Lucas asked, "Can you build something with us, Dad?" Richard smiled. "Of course, we can start next weekend." As he continued sharing stories, one particular memory caught Oliver's attention. Richard showed a picture of himself with a building toy, and Oliver was captivated. He began asking questions about how the toy worked, and Richard patiently explained every detail. From the doorway, Claire watched the sparkle in Oliver's eyes and felt the weight of a special moment forming. After the boys fell asleep, Claire stepped in to turn off the lights. Richard was still sitting on the floor, looking at the album with a nostalgic smile. "Thank you for this," he said without looking up. "They're giving me something I didn't know I needed." Claire didn't respond immediately. She just nodded and left him there as she walked out of the room. Yet, deep down, she knew something within her was shifting too. Maybe it was time to reconsider what she had thought impossible, forgiving him. The next morning, Richard arrived with tools and materials to build a small wooden playhouse with the boys. The backyard was soon filled with laughter and the clumsy sound of hammering as the four of them worked together. From the porch, Claire couldn't help but smile. This was more than just a project. It was a symbol of something bigger that was taking shape. Despite all the progress, Claire still held back. She knew Stella wasn't completely out of the picture, and that something could happen at any moment to disrupt the fragile peace they were beginning to build. But for now, she chose to enjoy the present. That night, as the boys slept, Claire reflected on all the changes over the past few weeks. Richard was no longer the man she had known years ago. He still had flaws, but he seemed genuinely committed to being an active part of his children's lives. Perhaps it was time to lower her guard, at least a little. Meanwhile, Stella, furious about the growing closeness between Richard and Claire, continued plotting her next move. To her, this strengthening bond was a direct threat to everything she had built with Richard. This time, she was determined not to lose. The days unfolded with a new dynamic in Claire's home. She and Richard had unexpectedly reached a friendly coexistence. While emotional barriers still lingered, their conversations felt more natural, and the moments they shared with the boys revealed that something was changing. Unlike before, Richard showed patience and genuine effort to be a present figure without forcing his way in. One afternoon, as Claire prepared lunch, Richard walked into the kitchen holding an envelope. "Claire, can I talk to you for a moment?" She looked at him, still guarded, but nodded. He placed the envelope on the counter without speaking at first. When he finally did, his voice was calmer than she expected. "I know I've refused to help in the past, but this time is different. I want you to accept this," he said, sliding the envelope toward her. Claire opened it and found a check inside. The amount was significant, enough to cover months of bills and expenses for the boys. She immediately shook her head. "Richard, I don't need this. I've always managed to take care of them on my own, and I'll keep doing so." He raised his hands in a gesture of surrender, but his gaze remained steady. "I know you can, Claire. I know how hard you've worked to give them everything. But this isn't just about money. It's about me truly being part of their lives. I don't want this to be a burden for you." She remained silent for a moment, considering his words. The old version of Richard would have offered the money arrogantly, as if it were a solution to all problems. But now there was something different about him. It wasn't condescension, it was humility. "I'll think about it," she finally replied, folding the check and placing it back in the envelope. Richard accepted her response without pressing, something that surprised Claire. He was indeed learning to respect the boundaries she had set. As the weeks went by, Richard's efforts became increasingly evident. He wasn't just helping financially, he was actively involved in the boys' daily lives. He took them to school, helped with homework, and even learned from Claire how to handle the small crises of everyday life, tantrums or broken toys. For Claire, it was surprising to see someone who once seemed so distant, now so engaged. One evening, after a long day, Richard and Claire sat on the porch while the boys slept. The moon softly illuminated the backyard, where the tools from building the wooden playhouse still lay scattered. "You know, I never imagined I'd be here," Richard said, breaking the silence. Claire glanced at him, curious. "What do you mean?" "Here, with you, with them. For years, I was so focused on work, on other people's expectations, that I didn't see what really mattered. Now that I'm trying to make things right, I keep asking myself why it took me so long." Claire crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe. "Sometimes we only realize what matters when we've almost lost everything." Richard nodded, but there was something more in his expression. He hesitated before continuing. "Claire, I need to tell you something about what happened at the altar." She felt her body tense. For years, she had carried the pain of that day, and while some wounds had begun to heal, others still hurt. Even so, she nodded, signaling for him to continue. "My mother didn't just convince me to call off the wedding, she also—" He paused, taking a deep breath. "She threatened to cut off all financial support. She said if I married you, I'd be on my own." Claire blinked, surprised. "So you left me because you were afraid of losing her money?" "It wasn't just the money," he quickly responded. "It was everything. She controlled every aspect of my life. I was a coward, Claire. I didn't want to face it, so I ran. I know none of this excuses what I did, but you deserve the truth." Claire felt a mix of anger and understanding. The pieces were finally falling into place, but that didn't make the memory any less painful. "You should have told me back then," she said, her voice heavy with emotion. "We could have faced it together. I would have stood by you." "I know," Richard said, his eyes full of regret. "But I was young and stupid. I made the wrong choice, and I pay for it every day." The silence between them was heavy, but Claire felt something inside her crack. It wasn't the kind of truth that erased years of hurt, but it was a step. A small step, perhaps, but a step. She looked at him and sighed. "I don't know if I can ever fully forgive you, Richard, but at least now I know what really happened." He nodded, accepting her words humbly. "That's all I can ask for." The next morning, as the boys ran to hug Richard when they saw him arrive, Claire watched from a distance. For the first time in years, she felt that something was genuinely changing for the better. There was still a long road ahead, but maybe, just maybe, this family was finally starting to come together. The courtroom was packed once again. Claire arrived early, gripping Amelia's hand tightly, her attorney and friend. She took deep breaths, trying to stay calm. Since learning the truth about being abandoned at the altar, She felt less adrift, but still wasn't ready to fully forgive Richard. The tension between them had eased, but the weight of the legal battle still pressed heavily on her shoulders. Richard arrived accompanied by his lawyer. There was something different about him that day. He seemed more serious, more focused. He wasn't the same man Claire had known years ago. Stella, on the other hand, was noticeably absent. Her absence was significant, though no one seemed to question why. Claire assumed that after the previous revelations, Stella had chosen to step back to avoid further humiliation. The judge entered, and the hearing began. Both sides' lawyers presented their closing arguments. Amelia, always sharp, emphasized the emotional bond Claire had built with the boys and how she had been the only consistent parental figure in their lives. Richard's lawyer, on the other hand, argued that he was now committed to being a present father and that his involvement was essential for the children's development. When Richard was called to testify, Claire watched him closely. He spoke calmly, admitting his mistakes and taking responsibility for his choices. He acknowledged Claire's doubts, but expressed his determination to earn her trust and that of his children. "I don't expect Claire to forgive me right away," he said. "But I'm here because I want to be the father my children deserve, and I won't give up on them." Richard's words echoed through the room. Claire felt a wave of emotion, but didn't let it show. It was still hard to fully believe in his intentions, but he seemed sincere. When it was Claire's turn to speak, she stood, adjusting her dress with trembling hands. Her voice, however, was steady. "For 5 years, I've been everything my children had. I raised them on my own, facing challenges only a single mother could understand. They are my absolute priority, and I will always do what's best for them. If that means allowing Richard to be part of their lives, I'm willing to consider it. But let me be clear, my trust will not be given freely." The judge listened attentively, weighing both sides' statements. After a few hours of deliberation, he returned with his decision. Primary custody will remain with Miss Claire. However, Richard will be granted regular visitation and active participation in the children's upbringing. Both parents are expected to work together to ensure the well-being of their children. Claire felt a mix of relief and uncertainty. It was the most balanced decision, but she still worried about what it would mean in the long term. Richard, on the other hand, seemed grateful. He looked at Claire with a small smile, which she returned with a brief nod. After the hearing, as everyone was leaving the courtroom, Stella appeared unexpectedly. She stood with a serious expression, her eyes fixed on Richard. "Do you really think you can be this perfect father now?" she asked, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Richard met her gaze, his expression calm. "I'm going to try, and that's what matters." Stella laughed, but there was bitterness in her voice. "Good luck with that. You're on your own now." She turned and walked away, making it clear she was done with this chapter. For Claire, it was a relief to see her go. Without Stella's interference, things could finally move forward without manipulation or drama. Later that same day, Richard went to Claire's house. He wanted to see the boys, but he also felt the need to speak with her. When he arrived, the boys greeted him with hugs, already accustomed to their father's presence. Claire, however, stood in the kitchen, quietly observing from a distance. After the kids went to their room, Richard approached. He seemed hesitant, but determined. "Claire, can I talk to you?" She nodded and led him to the living room. They sat on the couch, and he began to speak. "I want to thank you for letting me be part of the boys' lives. I know it hasn't been easy for you, but there's something else I need to say." Claire frowned, both curious and cautious. "What is it?" Richard took a deep breath before answering. "I still love you. I always have. I know it's too late to say this, but I needed you to know." Let's have some fun with those who only read the comments. Type milkshake in the comments. Only those who make it this far will understand. Now, let's get back to the story. His words caught Claire off guard. She stared at him, trying to process what he had just said. For years, she had carried the pain of his abandonment, but also traces of the love she had once felt for him. Hearing this now left her conflicted. "Richard, I don't know what to say," she replied honestly. "A lot has happened. This isn't something that words alone can fix." "I know," he said with a sad smile. "I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know. And if one day you're ready to think about something beyond what happened, I'll be here." Claire stayed silent, and Richard didn't push. He stood, said goodnight, and left. As he walked away, Claire felt a mixture of emotions. On one hand, she was relieved to finally hear the truth. On the other, she knew there was still so much to process. She looked at the boys playing in their room and decided that, for now, she would focus on them. Richard was trying to make amends, and maybe, in the future, she could consider what he had said. But for now, her priority remained protecting and raising her children. Months passed since the final hearing, and Claire and Richard's routine had taken on a new shape. He was increasingly present, not just in the boys' lives, but also in Claire's day-to-day. Their relationship, initially centered on the children, began to evolve slowly. Casual lunches, late-night conversations, and shared moments with the boys became natural, something neither of them had thought possible. One day during a trip to the park, while the boys played on the slide, Richard approached Claire. He seemed nervous, something unusual for him. "Claire, I've been thinking," he began hesitantly. "About us. About all of this." She looked at him, waiting for him to continue. "What about this, Richard? Maybe we should try again. Not for the boys, but because I want to. I want to show you that I can be the man you deserve." Claire was silent for a moment, her eyes fixed on the boys in the distance. The months they had spent together had shown her that Richard had truly changed. He was more humble, more patient, and despite all the hurt, something inside her felt it might be worth a second chance. "It won't be easy, Richard," she finally said. "There's a lot we need to work through." He nodded, a small smile on his face. "I know, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes." The following months were a fresh start. Richard and Claire began rediscovering their relationship, now more mature and with the boys as the central focus of their lives. Small gestures became significant. A dinner he cooked after a long day, a message of encouragement she sent when he faced challenges at work, and the simple moments when they laughed together as their children played in the yard. One day, Richard took Claire and the boys on a picnic in a field of flowers outside the city. It was a sunny day, with a clear blue sky and a gentle breeze. As the boys ran through the flowers, Richard asked Claire to take a walk with him. He was holding something in his hands, but kept it a secret. When they reached a secluded spot with a breathtaking view of the field, Richard stopped and looked into her eyes. "Claire, you're the person who showed me what true love really is, not just for me, but for our children. You're the reason I want to be a better man, a better father. I want this second chance to last forever. Will you marry me?" He opened a small box, revealing a simple yet beautiful ring that seemed to reflect the sincerity of his words. Claire felt tears welling up in her eyes. For so long, she had imagined what she would do if something like this ever happened. But now, in this moment, the answer was clear. "Yes, Richard, I will." The boys, watching from a distance, saw what was happening and ran toward them, shouting with joy. Lucas was the first to ask, "Mommy, are you getting married? Are we going to be a real family?" Claire laughed, kneeling down to hug them. "Yes, my loves, we're going to be a family." In the months that followed, the wedding preparations were filled with laughter and amusing chaos, especially with the boys insisting on helping with everything. The big day arrived in a simple garden, surrounded by close friends and family. The boys played a role in every detail. Lucas carried the rings, Noah decorated with flowers, Liam gave an adorable speech, and Oliver walked Claire down the aisle. When Claire and Richard exchanged vows, it felt as though the past had finally been laid to rest. They stood before a future they had built together, overcoming every challenge along the way. After the ceremony, the family celebrated with their loved ones. The children ran through the garden while Claire and Richard danced under strings of lights. He held her close, whispering, "I promise you, Claire, I'll make you and the boys happy every single day of my life." She smiled, her heart feeling lighter than it had in years. "We're together now, Richard, and that's all that matters." That night, before bed, the boys surprised their parents with a special gift. An album full of drawings depicting happy family moments. On the last page, they had written in big, clumsy letters, "Our family is forever." Claire closed the album, holding it to her chest. For the first time in years, she felt that the journey, which had started with so much pain, had led to something beautiful. A family built on love, patience, and the willingness to start over. Do you think Claire made the right decision by forgiving Richard? Share your thoughts in the comments. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What's your score? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to follow all our stories, and check out more emotional stories by clicking here on the end screen.